So thank you. With that, we'll go to House File 5055. Welcome to the committee, Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and Chair Gomez, Chair Davids. Thank you so much. I am Paul Marquardt, the Commissioner of Revenue for the state of Minnesota, and very pleased to be here to present Governor Walz, Lieutenant Governor Flanagan's supplemental tax budget. And it looks like we're already set up here. So I'm joined at the table by Madeline Hera, who's our State Program Administrative Coordinator, who will be working the slides and so forth. So again, I know you're busy. Thank you so much for hearing the bill. And Chair Gomez, Chair Davids, thank you for authoring the bill also. So moving to the first one here, basically the entire governor's budget is based on to have a responsible and balanced budget. And so with the proposal he has with the tax portion and this, it leaves $3.7 billion on the bottom line in this biennium and $1.8 billion to the good in 28-29. And if you include inflation, there's still about $800 million to the good. And that's the key is, as the governor, to make sure we have a balanced budget. So we'll just move to the next one, kind of broken up into major goals. Make Minnesota the best state in the nation for children and families. And one of the big proposals here and a big priority for the governor is a really expanded child-independent care credit. It would be by far the largest in the nation. And the governor, as you have heard many times, have always made it his mission to make Minnesota the best state in the nation for kids. And the big part of this is a new young child credit. And it's really modeled off of Representative Katitza Watoon has had this young child credit for many years that's been proposed. And what it does is that if you have a child from 0 to 4 years of age, the credit is greatly enhanced. And in this governor's proposal, if you have a child 0 to 4, one child, that credit would be maximum of $3,000 for child care expenses, a $3,000 credit. And if you have 2 or more children in that age group, it's $6,000. So for a lot of families, it would be a $3,000 or a $6,000 tax benefit. And overall, this would provide middle-income families with a tax cut of about $150 million a year. So the big thing is that young child credit. About 104,000 families would benefit, and about 61,000 families would qualify for that young child credit, which would be very significant. Then next slide, please. Very good, you're way ahead of me. So this just kind of explains that kind of the key here is that the phase out begins at about 120,000 income. By the way, I know you had Eric Willett from the Department of Revenue here talking about the incident report. And if you go with married families, the median income is $150,000 now in Minnesota. So this would start, you'd get the maximum benefit up to 120,000, and then it would completely phase out by 170. So it kind of gets into that area of kind of middle income families. 26 states have a child independent care credit. Not all of them are refundable. This one would be refundable. And I will just say that if this could pass, combined with the child tax credit already in law, this really would make Minnesota probably the top state in the nation, if not one of the top, as far as in the tax code for families. Because we have one of the largest standard deductions at almost $30,000. We have one of the largest dependent exemptions at $5,200 per dependent. So if you have 2 parents, 2 children, the first $40,000 of income is not taxable in Minnesota. And what even makes it probably better than states that don't have an income tax is you have refundable credits that actually lessen the burden, and this would really do that. So it would really, for families and children, make Minnesota really top-notch when it comes to the tax code. Why do we need this? those are numbers there just for you to look at later on. But does this solve all of the child care concerns and problems? Absolutely not. I mean, there is still availability, getting child care providers, cost and all those type of things. But the governor and I were in Duluth a couple weeks ago with child care providers and parents and so forth, and they said this would be a big step in affordability, really one of many things that could help kind of address the child care situation, but this would be big for affordability. And the last slide on this is just some benefits. I think, the first three are really important, recognizing the parents' dual role of working in the labor force, but also providing good care for their dependents, enhances family well-being, and I think really important, reduces gender inequality and making a stronger workforce in economic growth. Okay, so we will move on to the next area, maintaining Minnesota's competitive edge. So you've heard a lot on federal conformity, but we are a static conforming state, which means we are statically conformed to all federal provisions up to May 1st of 2023. This bill would move that to March 1st of 2026. So basically, we have to take action to conform. Otherwise, there isn't. We're not a rolling state which automatically conforms, and then if you don't want to conform, you have to take positive action. So we are one of 18 static states. So what do we look at? What's in the governor's and lieutenant governor's thoughts when they look at priorities? It's, trying to have a minimum impact on our customers, trying to reduce the level of complexity, which of course, if you don't conform, makes things more complicated. And then also the impact to state revenues and policy and so forth. So let's take a look at what's in the governor's and lieutenant governor's proposal. So what I have here is not every single item, but kind of the large conformity cost items. And if you look at these numbers in parentheses, it's the first biennium and then the second biennium, and in millions. So these are the largest cost items. And the largest cost item is the modification of the limit on business interest deduction. Right now, that's limited to 30% of the income, and the income definitions were increased, so that will help businesses. Enhancement of the dependent care credit, which basically is going from 35% of expenses to 50%. Increase the dollar limitation for Section 179, basically taking that limit that you can full expense from $1.25 million to about now, because of inflation, $3.13 million. And then there's some other. So those are all in the bill, and those are cost items. Next slide, please. So these are also in the bill, but they are revenue gainers. And the big one is this first one, the enhancement of the employer-provided child care credit. And let me just go over quickly how this works, because you can see it raises $241 million into the next biennium. So the federal H.R. 1 greatly enhanced the employer-provided child care credit, where it used to be 25% of expenses up to a maximum of $150,000. Now it moves that to 40% of the expenses up to a maximum of, instead of $150,000 credit, a $500,000 credit. And if you're a small business, which is $31 million of gross receipts averaged over 5 years, that actually goes to 50% or $600,000. So it's 4 times more. So there's going to be a lot more credit taken by employers providing this child care credit. So the federal government and the state currently does not allow you, if you're getting this credit, to also be able to deduct those expenses. Otherwise, you'd be getting a double benefit. You'd be getting the credit and you'd be getting the deduction. So we know that that deduction is going to increase, which will increase income, the bottom line, for businesses, because they're getting a much better benefit from the credit, but they can't also deduct the expenses. That flows down to the state. And the state, while we don't have the credit, we have never provided, nor have federal government allowed you to take that deduction. So that now flows down to the state revenues, and that's where that increase comes from, the increase that is spent on those. Some of the other ones is the floor now on deductions, the bonus depreciation, and so forth. Next slide then are some large cost items that are not in the supplemental tax budget proposal that you're seeing here. And the big one is the full expensing on research and experimental. And that's, 320 million roughly. And that is mainly because of cost. That is mainly why that is not in there. Another big one that is not in there is the qualified opportunity zones. And there's just are some concerns about the effectiveness, and we can certainly go into that more, but that one is not in there. I want you to take you down to that chart if you would. So the conformity for what you see here with the governor's proposal on conformity is that first line, which means it's a cost of about 1.2 million, but a revenue gain of about 268 million into the second biennium. But if you take that employer enhanced credit out, which is the second line, you can see there's what you have. You actually have a $127 million tax cut in the first biennium and a 26 million increase into the next. Next, please. So I don't know if this committee has talked yet at all about the pass-through entity tax.
Never heard of it, Mr. Commissioner.
Yeah, okay, have you? So I am not going to spend more time other than to say that the governor does support this provision, and it does provide about a $400 to $500 million tax benefit on the federal side for businesses. The next one also with SAF, you have had a thorough hearing on that. Not going to cover anything new on that other than, again, the governor and lieutenant governor supports that provision, and it would extend it to 2035. Next, here, modernizing Minnesota's tax code to the new economy. So both proposals you're going to hear from the governor you have heard before. So I'm not going to go over in great detail, but and we know that revenue increases may be a really tough sell. But putting that aside, think just about, are we meeting today's economy in creating a fair and stable tax system? I think that's the key. And so this one expands, first one, the proposal from last year, it cuts the sales tax rate slightly and expands to 3 selected services, or 3 or 4 selective services. And it really tries to right-size the tax code to our economy. Back in 1967, when we started our sales tax, and we were about like second to the last state in the nation to have a sales tax, it was 60% goods, which is taxed primarily, and 40% services, which are not. That's flipped today. And since 1967, when we had a 3% sales tax, we've raised our sales tax 4 times to 6.5%, because it, quite frankly, keeps getting narrower all the time. So this would also create a more stable and stronger revenue source. Lowers the statewide sales tax rate. This would be the first cut in state history. Individuals, the business-to-business sales remain exempt, and I think that's important because businesses would see the full benefit of the decrease in the cut. And so you're talking about businesses, construction companies buying huge pieces of equipment. On $1 million sale of equipment, saves $750. Now, that might not be a huge amount, but businesses on every one of their purchases would see a cut. And we'll talk about how it impacts residents a little bit more here. Next one, there is where we expand to 3 services, primarily accounting, banking, brokerage, and legal. And I'm just going to say that, I've had meetings with folks from those entities, and they bring up great points. But when it comes to services, and these aren't all of them, when you look at the tax expenditure report, the business-to-business is about $4.8 billion that isn't taxed. And it's about 631 million of consumer purchases. We're just dealing with the consumer purchases part, about 226 million out of that 631. So if you look at the whole volume kind of services, which isn't all of it, we're really expanding 227 million out of about 4.8 billion, about 5%. This is expanding things about 5%. It's very incremental. And so the point is, if we can't look at kind of starting expanding with this, are you ever going to expand? And we know that there are already many services being taxed. So it's not equal there. We're not gathering. And so if you're going to make decisions and you really talk about trying to make our system more fair and more stable, these are the ways you have to look at it. And this is a very incremental, modest approach to doing that. So there's the slide that shows a lot of the services, and we've been through that before. So I'm going to go to the next slide. Those are excluded ones. Okay, we'll go to the last slide here. So, okay, there's a number of excluded ones. We'll go back. As you can see, again, this is from last year. So if you're with an accountant filing your taxes on the working family credit, child tax credit, or something, that is not taxable. I want to give you an example on business to business. If you're a farm and you hire an accountant to do your taxes, that is not taxable because that's business to business. So let's go to the last slide. And one reason why the governor selected these certain services is because this is a way in which you can make the sales tax, which you have heard is regressive, you can make it less regressive. And let me just show you how that works. If you look at the sales tax rate cut is $96 million. The total service expansion is $227 million. But according to Department of Revenue Research, in looking at Federal Consumer Expenditure Survey, about 10% will use an attorney in a year. So if you take the attorney out, which is 10% of the users, you can see if you look at that next to the right, that chart, the tax cut's $96 million and accounting financials $95. So for the remaining 90%, you actually have a wash. And yet you've expanded, made your system more stable. And so the average household, if you wouldn't use any of these selective services, would see a tax cut of about $32 a year. And we know about 25% will use legal services, accounting, and another 25% financial. So I think you can safely say that really a majority of folks will see a slight tax cut, quite frankly. And even if you do use some of the selective services, the very last bullet there, if your limited services are $470 or less, because that equals the $32, you're still benefiting. So the average accountant is about $270 if you go to an accountant. So even if you use an accountant, that's $270. You still, if you don't use any other selected services, you're going to see a cut. So it's a way this is an expansion, a very thoughtful way in choosing selected to expand the base, make the sales tax less regressive, and have a stable tax. Next one we're going to move to then is the social media tax. Establishes a tax, and this is also something you have heard in the past. But basically, it taxes the activity of the collection of consumer data by social media platforms. And I think those next two small bullets are important. Consumer data has a value to it. And social media platforms are capturing that data for consumers at no cost and then using that data to make a profit. This social media tax is a way to bring some of that value back to the consumer. This will raise about $100 million a year. In the governor's proposal, it does not go to the general fund. It goes into a special revenue fund, which goes to ensuring that workers and businesses are prepared to compete and succeed in our new AI global internet economy. So it goes into a fund that this committee, Council on Artificial Intelligence Readiness, will look at providing to make sure, help businesses that they have needs in training, in new equipment, whatever, to meet the AI. Because we know there's going to be a change in the workforce. This helps adjust that, and it can meet that. So this doesn't go to the general fund. Dollar for dollar, it comes back to help businesses and workers. Next, please. It's based on the number of consumers, as you can see there. Basically, the number of consumers is a proxy for the value that consumers are providing by giving up their data. but it's graduated. And even at 10 million, let's say you have 10 million consumers, it would be about $5.60 per consumer. So as a consumer's data, their value worth $5.60 a year. Next slide. Here's some differences that I think you might find kind of interesting. It's a new economy. This social media platform is a very unique industry with a very unique business model. And here are some differences. So businesses in a traditional business model sells goods and services to consumers to earn profits. That transaction is taxed. Social media provides free services. Consumers watch it. They watch advert. They provide data. And that generates a profit, but that transaction is not taxed. Companies pay taxes, let's look at mining taxes, on extracted minerals from the land. And they pay taxes on that. Social media platforms extract data and value from consumers, but there's no tax there. And finally, profits earned today through tangible resources made in factories. In this new economy, these resources which profits are made are done out in the cloud. They're intangibles. They're tough to measure. So is this the right way to kind of get at a part of the economy, value? Is this the right way? I don't know for sure, but we really need to start looking at this because this is a huge part of our economy that the normal tax system just doesn't fit towards. And it's not only bringing in revenues that should be coming in, but it's a fairness to a lot of other like-kind businesses that are paying taxes on very similar services, but they just have a different business model, but wind up providing value in the same thing that they're taxed on, and this is not. So the last thing I will look at, I mean, there's a lot of net choices out there fighting this tooth and nail because, you get a foot in the door, things can happen. And they're throwing everything out there. I will say, and we can go over that many of the lawsuits bringing forward, even the Internet Tax Freedom Act and that, this does not tax access. This does not treat social media platforms any differently than others. This is taxing value and data. And, the last time the ITFA was made permanent in 2016, a lot has happened in the last 10 years. Wayfair decision was 2018. That was after that. You now can tax internet sales. But you look at the social media dominance and the new mobile revolution and all those types, streaming services, AI, chat box, it's different than it even was 10 years ago. So again, I think it's worth the debate to look at, are we capturing everything in the economy, and what can we do looking forward to try to capture that? So additional priorities. The next one is part of the Governor Walz's comprehensive gun violence prevention, safety, and security proposal. And it creates a 10% gross receipts tax on the sales of handguns and 11% gross receipts tax on long guns and ammunition. Now, this is very much replicated after the federal firearms and ammunition excise tax. The federal one taxes manufacturers, this taxes retailers. So that's kind of the main difference, but the rates are the same as far as on handguns and long guns and ammunition and so forth. But this is part of the governor's proposal on gun violence and safety. Next, please. There we go. This is just clarifying that if you have medical cannabis and licensed dispensary, this also now applies this to off-reservation for tribal registry programs. Just kind of clarifies that. Next is some more technical things. Now the state would be able to, if you're not paying your cannabis taxes, be able to post that like you do with liquor taxes as part of that. Next, historic structure rehabilitation matches it more closely with the federal government priorities. And the last one we have here is something that was proposed last year. It would be adding 11 more auditors to the Department of Revenue to try to keep up with the more complex structures of partnerships and so forth on auditing. So, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, again, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to hear this. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for being with us today. We really appreciate it. I really want to thank you for, especially for your focus on the obligation that we have as people who make decisions about our tax code to look at the economy as it's functioning today and look at our revenue system and just ensure that we are, adapting our tools to the modern economy and to the transitions that we've seen in various areas. I just read this report recently that I think was from a couple months ago, that there are 88 of the most profitable corporations in the world, including like Tesla and the Yum Brands, the parent company of Taco Bell and Pizza Hut and all this stuff. And there are these 88 giant corporations. Collectively, they've made $105 billion in profit last year, and they paid no income taxes. And I think people hear that, and they think about themselves, and they say, why does Tesla pay no income taxes and I pay income taxes? And so, these issues of inequality, wealth stratification that we deal with in this committee are all related to, the way that our revenue code responds and interacts with the economy as it is today. So thank you so much for bringing up those issues. All right, so we have a lot of testifiers. We're going to be timing you, and so if you hear an alarm, please wrap up your comments in the next few seconds. So first up, we have Nan Madden, and on deck after that is Brian Lake. Welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself as you get started.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Nan Madden. I'm Director of the Minnesota Budget Project, and thank you for the opportunity to testify today. The federal bill H.R. 1 reflects harmful priorities. Its expensive tax package gives the largest tax cuts to high-income households while doing little for most everyday Minnesotans. These tax cuts are funded in part by the largest funding cuts in their history to Medicaid and SNAP, and shifting new responsibilities for providing and funding those services to the state and counties. That's the wrong direction for our state. We thank Governor Walz for a tax plan that raises revenues to fund some important steps to respond to H.R. 1 and makes progress towards sustainably funding essential public services into the future. We would urge the committee to take an even stronger revenue-raising approach, which is needed to make up for the unprecedented federal actions that dramatically impact Minnesotans' ability to get health care, put food on the table, and meet other basic needs. We appreciate many positive features of Governor Walz's conformity package, including that it does not conform to opportunity zones, which are an expensive, ineffective tax break for high-income investors that does not deliver societal benefits, and it does not replicate H.R. 1's no tax on tips and no tax on overtime provisions. These are poorly designed federal tax policies that do little for the most struggling Minnesotans and make arbitrary distinctions between different kinds of workers, while at the same time it erodes funding for the services that Minnesotans count on. Governor Walz's tax plan also lifts up other important revenue conversations, including the potential for modernizing our state's sales tax to reflect today's economy, and what role our tax policy should play when large tech companies are not contributing towards the public good in proportion to their profits or their impact on society. Finally, we also appreciate that Governor Walz would invest in tax compliance, which is another responsibility being shifted to the states given the deep cuts to the IRS. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Madden. Up next, Brian Lake, and on deck, Tanner Fritzinger. Welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself as you get started.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Brian Lake. I represent the Minnesota State Bar Association. The bar is very concerned about the proposed sales tax on consumer legal services, which will be very harmful to low-income and average-income Minnesotans, like an abused woman who's seeking an order for protection, a single parent trying to collect delinquent child support, someone being sued for a debt they don't actually owe because of identity theft, and many other types of cases. And while we don't support expanding the sales tax to business services, I do want to point out that because this is a consumer-only tax, it's going to create situations where individuals will have their legal fees taxed when they're in litigation against entities that will not. And this is only going to exacerbate existing resource imbalances in employment discrimination claims, eviction cases, and many, many other types of cases. This bill would also establish a deeply unfair policy that Minnesotans have to pay a tax to the state in order to defend themselves against the state, even when the state is wrong and even when the state loses, in things like eminent domain cases, tax challenges, occupational licensure disputes, and many, many other types of cases. And Madam Chair, I'll just close with a real-life example that'll kind of illustrate how harmful this tax could be. And this was a real-life case. It involved a young couple in their mid-20s. She was a speech pathologist. He's a blue-collar laborer. They don't have a lot of money. Their first child was born prematurely and fortunately survived and became the center of their lives. Now, one day, the parents noticed that the child had some spots of discolored skin, so they went to the ER, which was a fateful decision because someone in the ER thought this discoloration was caused by bruising, and a child protection investigation was launched. And in these kind of situations, it is presumed that one of the parents abused the child, so they each had to get their own lawyer. This case went on for 8 months, so you can imagine the horrible stress and strain these people were under, worried about losing their child, while at the same time piling up big legal fees that they really couldn't afford. Fortunately, their lawyers were able to prove that the discoloration on the baby's skin was due to the premature birth. It had nothing to do with any kind of abuse. But under this bill, these poor people would have had to pay thousands of dollars to the state of Minnesota just for their efforts to prevent the state from wrongfully ripping away their child. And I think this really illustrates how unique legal services are. When people need lawyers, it's often an unexpected situation, it can be extremely expensive, and it carries life-altering consequences. And Madam Chair, there's a reason only 3 states tax legal services. I think it would be a major mistake to make Minnesota the 4th.
Thank you for your testimony. Up next, Tanner Fritzinger, and on deck is Brian Cook.
Thank you, Chair Gomez, Chair David, and members of the committee. My name is Tanner Fritzinger, and I'm a political affairs coordinator with the Minnesota Association of Professional Employees. We are a labor union representing more than 18,000 state workers across all agencies, boards, and commissions. Our members protect the environment, ensure the safety of our food and water, and help solve some of the most difficult criminal cases in our state. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of sections of the governor's tax bill. We support the inclusion of the sales tax base expansion to include certain professional services. Tax and accounting, banking and brokerage, and legal services will broaden the tax base, generate additional revenue, and help address the state's structural budget imbalance, without having to increase the base sales tax rate. Additionally, the governor's proposed tax on consumer data collection by social media platform businesses continues an important conversation about how Minnesota can modernize its tax code. And while we share concerns about worker displacement due to AI, we would implore the committee to direct those funds instead to the general fund. This type of forward-thinking approach will ensure Minnesota can continue to access critical public programs, even as the cost to provide essential state services continues to rise. While there are concerns with the ability to implement this proposal, and we encourage the committee to pursue more reliable policies, these unique ideas will be essential in providing stable revenue sources for future budgets. We're also excited to see the inclusion of enhanced compliance and additional auditors at the Department of Revenue. Minnesota needs to seriously consider substantial revenue raisers, not just cutting expenditures, to address its structural budget imbalance. Modernizing and expanding the tax base will give the state the resources it needs to meet current obligations and prepare for future challenges, without having to raise rates or undermine the quality and accessibility of public services that Minnesotans rely on every day. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Up next, Brian Cook. On deck, Alexandra Fitzsimmons. Mr. Cook, please proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Chair Gomez, members of the House Taxes Committee. My name is Brian Cook. I'm the Director of Tax, Fiscal Policy, and Elections for the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber represents more than 6,300 businesses of all sizes in all corners of the state who employ more than 500,000 employees. This morning, I would like to share some of our thoughts on the governor's proposed supplemental tax bill, House File 5055. In the interest of time, I won't speak on all of the provisions we support and oppose and direct you to the letter we have submitted as written testimony. The primary part of the bill we support is the general approach to largely conforming Minnesota's tax code with the relevant provisions of last year's federal H.R. 1. In particular, as part of the Invest in Minnesota Coalition, also has a handout that we've submitted, we would like to thank the governor for including conformity with Section 179 and bonus depreciation. However, we do think that not conforming with immediate expensing of research and experimentation is a missed opportunity. While it is a one-time timing shift that shows up as a big cost on the spreadsheet, That large cost also demonstrates the cash flow importance to businesses in Minnesota. As session has gone on, we've heard more and more from our members about the importance of this provision, especially as other neighboring states have adopted it. We do not want Minnesota to miss out. I also was struck in the presentation, as we look at some of the things that score as revenue decreases to the state, those are a lot of timing shifts. And we looked at things that were revenue increases, aren't necessarily timing shifts as much as they are new net revenue to the state. So we think there can be a little bit more of a balancing act there. Briefly, I also want to note our continued opposition to the expansion of the sales tax to some professional services. I'm going to point you to the Business Coalition letter on that subject as well. We also still oppose the social media tax proposal, which I've testified against in the past. Finally, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Commissioner Marquardt for his regular engagement with the Minnesota business community on the tax issues contained within this bill, whether we agree or disagree on some of them. We look forward to continuing to work with the Commissioner, the Department of Revenue, members of this committee to deliver a tax bill that improves the business climate in the state to the benefit of all Minnesotans. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Oh, good timing, Mr. Cook. Up next, Alexandra Fitzsimmons, and on deck is Dalton Danielson. Welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself as you get started.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Alexandra Fitzsimmons, and I'm the Senior Policy Director with Children's Defense Fund Minnesota. We research, develop, and advocate for policies and programs that improve the well-being of children and increase the economic security of families, especially families with low incomes. We appreciate Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan's proposal to expand the Child Independent Care Credit. This expansion responds to significant pressures Minnesota families are facing and takes meaningful steps to help offset the high cost of child care. Child care is essential to both family stability and children's well-being. For families with low incomes, it is often one of the biggest barriers to maintaining employment and providing consistent, stable environments for children. 80% of Minnesota children under age 6 have all available parents in the workforce. At the same time, Minnesota families face some of the highest child care costs in our country. The average cost of child care for an infant in the metro is $23,000 for center-based care and $12,000 for family child care. And the average cost in greater Minnesota is $15,000 for center-based care and $9,000 for family child care, amounts that are out of reach for many families without support. House File 5055 increases the amount of credit families can receive while recognizing the economic challenges of families with young children. That matters because research shows that even a $100 increase in the Child Independent Care Credit increases employment among mothers with young children. While the proposal will reach more than 100,000 families with an average credit of about $1,800, families with the lowest incomes who face the greatest barriers are likely to see smaller increases because the credit is tied to out-of-pocket expenses. While we support efforts to address child care affordability through tax policy, we also encourage continued focus on policies that more directly reach families with lowest incomes, including the Child Tax Credit Newborn Bonus, which received strong bipartisan support in this committee last session. Likewise, additional investments to expand access to child care statewide remain critical. For infants and toddlers, there are only about 19 licensed child care slots for every 100 children with working parents. Raising revenue must be part of our state strategy to create a Minnesota where all children thrive. The governor and lieutenant governor's child-focused proposal is a step forward in helping Minnesota families manage child care costs while supporting children's well-being, especially in their earliest years. Thank you for continuing to place children and their families with fewer financial resources at the center of your committee discussions and decisions. We're grateful for your time and your service.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Up next, Dalton Danielson, and then Eric Harris Bernstein. Welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself as you get started.
Morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, my name is Dalton Danielson, Fiscal Policy Director with the Minnesota Business Partnership. I'll start first by saying we recognize and appreciate the goal of expanding the dependent care credit. Helping families afford child care is certainly worthy of a conversation, and MBP has long supported policies that strengthen workforce participation and affordability. And there are some positives in this bill, including some movement on federal conformity items, as the Chamber mentioned and as the Commissioner went through in his presentation. However, we are concerned that this bill relies on a funding mechanism that undermines Minnesota's overall competitiveness. As I've mentioned in previous testimony, Minnesota's businesses compete nationally for talent and investment, and our talent is more mobile than ever. They have choices on where to live, where to work, and where to build their lives, especially those who now find themselves in remote roles. The expanded tax on services will add to the burden faced by Minnesota taxpayers. While incremental when compared to the business-to-business alternative, the impact still matters. Please refer to the letter submitted by the broader business community for more information on that proposal and how it may impact taxpayers. To conclude, members, Minnesota is at a crossroads. What we do this year in this committee will send a signal to businesses and our employees in Minnesota for the years to come. As you continue to weigh this proposal with the committee's own priorities, we urge you to focus on policies that invite and encourage economic growth and long-term success and fiscal sustainability. Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Up next, Eric Harris Bernstein. Welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself as you get started.
Chair Gomez, members of the committee, my name is Eric Bernstein. I am the coalition director of We Make Minnesota. We're a labor grassroots coalition that works working for a fair tax code and a state budget sufficient to meet our public investment needs. We appreciate the opportunity to share our perspective on the governor's tax bill, and we appreciate efforts in this bill to modernize our tax code and prepare our state for budget challenges ahead. I'm going to highlight two articles in particular, or sections. Article 3, Section 5 creates the social media consumer data tax. We really appreciate this concept, as we've talked about this year. Digital advertising and data collection are massively growing industries, and if we don't tax these industries like we tax other industries, then we end up with higher rates on all of us and on all of those other industries that are already taxed. I think there's questions about the implementation of this proposal. It's innovative, it's interesting, but we don't know exactly how to prove consumer location, to justify the exclusion of non-social media companies that are also making money collecting data and selling it or doing other things with it. And so some questions on that proposal, but we love the concept and appreciate it being brought forward. And then Article 3, Sections 6 through 8, it's the sales tax base expansion that has been talked about a lot today. We think this is another great concept of expanding the sales tax base and using that revenue to both bring in general fund dollars, but also lower the rate overall. There's a lot of industries that pay a lot of sales taxes. We all pay a lot of sales taxes, and we make it harder on ourselves when we carve out certain industries. We've obviously talked a lot about the digital advertising as something that we think that's a more robust way to expand the sales tax base and a more efficient way to implement a tax. But we appreciate this proposal as well. And overall, just want to say I love what the commissioner said about a fair and stable tax code and what we can do here with our sales tax. So as a closing, I'll just say our perspective is that taxes, they are inevitable. We do need them to pave our roads, to fund our schools and things like that. We don't view them as a punishment. And we think that if we have a broader base, we're able to fund the things we need without, sort of picking winners and losers. So we appreciate the parts of this bill that do that. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your testimony. That is the end of folks who've signed up ahead of time to testify. Is there anyone else present who wishes to testify on the governor's tax bill? All right, excellent. And my apologies, I forgot to mention this at the top. This bill actually, because it was introduced after deadline, I will say due to no fault by the two authors who delivered in a timely manner. But it actually got referred to rules, so it's not in our possession, so we're just hearing it informationally today. So we won't take any official committee action on this, but we do appreciate the commissioner for being here. Well, moving on to member discussion on the bill. Representative Joy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This one's probably for the commissioner. Representative Marquardt, or Commissioner Marquardt, sorry.
Old habits die hard, right?
Yes. On the long spreadsheet on line number 93, it says firearm ammunition gross receipt tax estimate with an assault weapons ban. Is that, and I guess my question is that, looking at that, does that mean there's some kind of legislation coming for a ban, or is that just estimated with that going through this year?
Commissioner Marquardt.
Madam Chair and Representative Joy, yes, as I said, this was part of the governor's comprehensive Gun Violence Safety Act, and as part of that, there is, an abolishment there,
Okay.
so, yes.
Thank you.
Anything further, Vice Chair Joy? Okay. Representative Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, for the presentation. The sales tax discussion and creating of new ways to tax, I find is interesting and concerning because we've always been traditionally, there is a purchase of value that the tax is applied towards. In other words, you buy equipment, you buy a toy, you buy whatever, and there's a sales tax. It seems like, I don't know if we've just run out of product that's being sold, but now we've went towards making up value for things instead of what you actually paid, but making up values. You can go all the way to registration tabs to now, well, the state decides what your vehicle is really worth. And now with the social media, it's a made-up value of if based on how many users, viewers, whatever you have, that now that if you have over so many, we figure the value is here. So that's a made-up value that we're going to start doing taxes with. My concern is, where does that end? To extremes, I mean, do we get to the point where we decide how much oxygen's worth if you bought it in a can, and now we're going to start taxing every breath a person takes? It's just, I'm concerned that that's where there is no end. That now we just decided what a value is something, and we're going to start taxing it. So that was more of a statement than a question, that where does it end and where do we stop making up value for things so we can tax it? So, thank you.
I don't know, Commissioner Marquardt, if you had anything or nothing. Yep,
It wasn't a
great,
question.
thank you. I just, so Leader Stevenson used to serve on this committee, and I remember when we heard this bill, the sort of the freestanding social media tax, I think it was last year. And he told this story just about this cartoon that he'd seen, and like the first panel of it has these two pigs, and they're like having this conversation, and they're like, man, this is the best place. I got a free place to stay. I got free food, everything I want to eat. It's awesome. And then the next panel of the cartoon is pulled back from the scene, and they're at a bacon factory. And the moral of the story is, if someone is giving you something and not charging you any money for it, it just may be that you're the product. And what we've seen is that these social media companies, it is that we're the product, but it's even more sinister than that, because it's that our children and our children's attention is the product. And so, you know, I think that it's not making up value to say that multi-billion-dollar companies that have been demonstrated to prey on young people, shouldn't be taxed, that they should just be completely tax-free. When someone making a thing, a manufacturer, pays taxes. You know, people who make things, people who employ people pay taxes. So anyway, sorry, moving on. Representative Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that reminder. I actually was gonna maybe also have the committee zoom out a little bit. I don't think it's that anyone is making up value, but the system that we operate in our capitalist system, right, drives this innovation where corporations and billionaires are always trying to figure out what is the next big thing, right? What can we make profits off? And so we very well may be taxing oxygen one day, because right now, right, people are making profits off water, and eventually people will probably be making profits off air, right? We've discovered, hydrogen gas, I think, or up in northern Minnesota. And so it's not that, the government is making up value for this, right? The government is trying to catch up. If you read Adam Smith, who is the father of capitalism, right, he says there is actually a role for government and a role for businessmen with morals. And so I think the important thing here is that our tax system is incredibly outdated. It has not caught up to where our economy is now, and we know that because laws don't move as fast, right? Like it took a really, really long time for us to pass any legislation legislation that affected or I guess even quote unquote governed the internet. And so I just wanted to make sure that we keep that in mind as we think about how we can pay for the things that we care about, pay for the things in society that are important as we adjust to our new modern economy. Thanks.
Thank you. Representative Anderson.
Thank you. I have two quick questions. First of all, on the sales tax expansion. So my accountant moved from Minnesota to Wisconsin a couple of years ago. And in that case, they would have to charge sales tax for their Minnesota residents? Is that how this would be?
Commissioner Marquardt.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative Anderson, it's typically where the service is taking place. And so, yeah, if you had a Minnesota resident, I would presume that would be a nexus.
Representative
Be
Anderson.
taxed, yes.
Okay, thank you. So all the accounting and legal and wealth management firms across the country that do business in Minnesota would now have to file a sales and use tax account with the state of Minnesota?
So,
Mr. Commissioner.
Madam Chair and Representative Anderson, like for an example, for an attorney, and I've got folks here that can correct me if I'm wrong, but let's say you're in Wisconsin as an attorney, and you're doing, working with this client in Wisconsin, that wouldn't be taxed, but if you take a deposition or something in Minnesota, now that would be taxed. If anything, or a court case is in Minnesota, that now would be a taxable service.
Okay, thank you. My second question.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you.
Sorry.
It's complicated. The pass-through entity. So I'm glad to see the governor is supporting that. When you were here last time, you said the governor didn't have a position on it. So, and then we let it just, not to blame the governor, but we just, let it happen, and now every business in the state's upset, and people are like wondering what's going on with this legislature. Did the governor change his mind, or did he just not have an opinion before today?
Representative Anderson, I think it would be more appropriate to blame me for that rather than the governor, but who's
Well, I
keeping
do.
track?
He said-
Also, I just will say that it's generally, I guess, it's been my observation that before the governor's bill has been kind of rolled out, that even if it's something that they have a position on, they sort of, they don't usually come up and testify on bills until after the governor's bill's been released. But Commissioner Marquardt.
Madam Chair, Representative Anderson, that's exactly correct. Until the governor officially comes out with his bill, we don't have a position unless it's in the governor's bill, and he didn't have it out at that time. And so-
Representative, yeah.
Okay.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess I would just add, when
Commissioner.
you talk about, all of this on conformity, whether or not it's the PT and that, the fact that, even if something gets passed, it's not going to be till May. That's an inconvenience, that's why we want to do that. But there's going to be amendments in that are going to have to be made in conformity, whether or not it's the PTE or other things that you're seeing in the conformity. So we can make all that work.
Representative Anderson.
Okay, thank you. And I think businesses are wondering how the Department of Revenue is handling this, assuming the PT passes if and when there's a tax bill. How is the department handling that for businesses? If businesses, they couldn't pay their taxes on April 15th as a business. So they either didn't pay their taxes, or they, in hopes that things might happen, or they paid them individually. If they paid them individually, my understanding is that then they can't get the money back individually for a year. So how's the department handling that?
Commissioner Marquardt.
So, Madam Chair and Representative Anderson, so one thing that the legislature can do, since if this gets passed in May, is you could say, okay, the first estimated payment now is considered on June 15th rather than April 15th. So it solves that. You would have to do that, but it would certainly be easy to do and make that. But you're right, if it's individual and you got a refund coming back, you got to wait till you file next year's taxes on that if you've got a refund coming back.
Representative Anderson.
So would the governor recommend that that's how we handle that if it passes? Just to say the first estimate is
Commissioner
not
Marquardt.
overdue?
Excuse me.
Madam Chair and Representative Anderson, I think in a memo we put out, that was one of the options. I don't know if there's a recommendation, but that is certainly one option that I would say would work, that
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Representative Anderson. All right, is there any further discussion before we go to Chair Davids to wrap us up? Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Markwart. I want to go back and talk briefly about the social media tax. I, as you know, as well documented, have no love for these social media companies and what they're doing to our kids. I have no interest in supporting Net Choice and any of these groups, but I do care about why we are establishing the state getting the value instead of the consumers. And there are many models out there that I've been looking at for years where the consumer gets the value and they own their data and they decide who gets access to it and can get value from that. But yet it looks like the state is coming in here and saying, and I think you said, we want to capture everything in the economy. So the state wants to quick get in there, and rather than the money accrue to the consumers and they get to control the data, the state will get the value and put it in a special revenue account. And so I think the model we're proposing is wrong, and we need a paradigm shift. But then secondly, in the discussion, you talked about, there'd be some benefits to businesses and workers through how this special revenue fund is spent. And I'm very concerned. I see no actual proposal on that. So could you explain more what that is about and what guardrails would be on there? Because it sounds like a potential fraud situation.
Commissioner Markwart.
Yeah, Madam Chair and Representative Robbins, first of all, to the first questions on, in the best of all worlds, the consumer would be able to sell that data. But that's not realistic right now. I don't know if there's a model that necessarily may be able to do that or not. Maybe you could, but the other thing is, it is coming back because those dollars that come back are helping, workers, they're helping businesses, they're helping lower costs and provide other services and so forth in the general scheme of things. So the consumer is getting back some of that value. And your second question dealt with?
Representative Robbins.
How do you plan to distribute the money that would come from this tax?
Yeah, so Madam Chair and Representative Robbins, this would be administered through deed. And as I talked to the folks from deed, the way this would work is that they would do things that aren't currently out there. This committee would decide where those dollars would go. But we have a lot of workforce training already out there. So a lot of it would be focused on what would be a lot of business needs. It may be, training, it might be infrastructure, whatever that might be there. But that part is actually going to be worked through deed, and I don't have that language necessarily right in front.
Representative Robbins.
Thank you. Well, I'm very concerned that this is just going to be a slush fund over a deed, and I do not support it. And I do want to commend, and I'm happy to share with your staff, that there are already models out there in use where consumers get the value. And so I hope we can have more conversation about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Robbins. Representative Harder.
Thank you, Chair Gomez. I have two questions. So the first one, this one has to do with the gross receipts tax on the firearms and ammunitions. And so I take this as being taxed into submission for what the governor is proposing to do. But what I want to know is, would this tax apply to a purchase of a firearm outside the state of Minnesota?
Commissioner Marquardt.
Madam Chair, I don't know if there's Representative Harder. Do you mind if I?
We're calling in some support here.
Yeah.
Just introduce yourself for the record as you get started with your answer. Thank you.
Hi, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I guess I wasn't sure who was speaking. My name is Margaret Reisdorf. I'm an attorney for the Minnesota Department of Revenue, and I work in the areas of individual income tax, corporate franchise, and sales and use. So to your question, I think it was, if I can repeat it correctly, is that what happens if you purchase as defined, a firearm, handgun, or ammunition in the proposed gross receipts tax out of state, but you're a Minnesota resident and you bring it into the state? Is that the right question?
Representative Harder? Great.
Yes, that is correct.
Please proceed.
Okay, so what would happen there is, like all of our gross receipts tax under Chapter 295, we have a complementary use tax. So you would have an obligation to remit use tax on that purchase. If you purchased it out of state, did not pay a comparable tax in that state, and you would owe use tax.
Representative Harder.
Okay, thank you, Chair Gomez. How would the enforcement of that happen?
Well, we have, Madam Chair, Representative Harder. We have the same sort of system, complementary system in place with our retail sales tax as we do with our other gross receipts tax. And so my guess is we would follow the same process here, is where we would audit purchases. There are federal records regarding sales that we would use and be able to determine whether purchases were made where either the gross receipts tax was paid or when it wasn't.
Representative Harder, anything further?
Yeah, thank you for that answer. I appreciate it. I do have one more question that would apply to the commissioner. And that has to do with this new audit within the audit unit within the department. And so generally, I'm not in favor of growing government, but I do want to know, what would the reasons be why we need this new unit? Can you share with how the department handles the pass-through audits now as to why you would need this new unit? Thank you.
Thank you.
Think
Madam
Mr.
Chair
Commissioner,
and
yeah.
Representative Hart, I mean, I can generally say, you might have folks here that could get into more details, but what we're hearing from folks is that the complexity of partnerships, there's partnerships within partnerships, it's just becoming very, very complex. And those audits get very timely and consuming and so forth. And it's to try to match, again, kind of the new economy, if you will, of just the composition and the makeup and organization of some of these. And so it's just a matter of needing more people to do more thorough and timely audits than in the past. And I guess if you want to know specifically how we do audits, I'd have to ask folks to help me out on that.
Representative Harder?
Thank you.
Great. I also just will mention that the starting point for most of the auditing that takes place in Minnesota starts with information that we get from the IRS, and they have basically gutted and doged their auditing capacity out of existence over the last couple of years. So that creates a big challenge for us in upholding our revenue system. All right, Representative Whitty.
Thank you, Chair Gomez. Thank you, Commissioner Marquardt, for your information. I was just curious, this past summer, I did some tours with some of the members of our tax committee out to some of our big businesses, and they were talking about the R&D credits and how that money was being utilized other places. And I appreciate their honesty on it. Obviously, that's tax money that could be left in the state. Do you guys keep any track of that? Because we see a lot of the net migration and stuff like that, but do we ever check from businesses where maybe they go outside of state because of the R&D tax credit and how much that might be hurting us here in Minnesota? Because some of these companies have been here over 100 years. They're not leaving, but they're not expanding, and that is a little concerning. And I think you heard that, in the beginning it might be expensive, but it might be adding more, and that's the number I'm looking at, trying to get to see what is the actuality of it.
Commissioner Marquardt.
Madam Chair, Representative Whitty, that's a great question. And first of all, remember, we did last year increase refundability for the R&D credit up to 25%, which is about $20 million a year. We produce information on businesses as far as kind of taxes as to how much, in cumulative, in general type of thing. But I don't know if we have, I'd have to double check if we have any statistics on like out migration or in migration. I mean, the federal government, IRS, puts out information on that on individuals. I don't know if it deals with businesses or not, but I would need to get back to you on that. Because we do have a lot of information we put out on businesses and income and their taxes, but I don't know if we have the migration data on that.
I appreciate
Representative Whitty.
Thank you, Chair Gomez. I appreciate that,
Yeah.
Commissioner Marquardt.
Thank you.
Great. Is there any further discussion before we go to Chair Davids to wrap us up? Seeing none, Chair Davids.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm fascinated by the paying of the use tax. I was going to ask the question to folks in this room, have you ever paid a use tax? Don't answer that. I remember my good friend Bob Carolyn, Senator Bob Carolyn, would buy, God rest his soul, he would buy art from around the world, and he'd bring it back to Minnesota, and he'd always pay a use tax. And I really had no clue what that was. Then I got to thinking, am I supposed to be paying use tax on my guns from Iowa? I don't know, but we'll just leave that alone. There goes an audit right there. So, Commissioner Marquardt, thank you. Thank you for your presentation, and thank you, Chair Gomez, for hearing the Gomez-Davids bill, and I think we also have a Davids-Gomez bill somewhere, yeah.
Fine piece of legislation.
Fine piece, fine piece. And so I just want to thank you for your accessibility, for your counsel on these items, and I look forward to working with you the next few weeks here. We need to get this wrapped up and done, a tax bill. But and of course, as a courtesy for years as tax chair, co-chair now, but tax chair, I would always carry the governor's bills, whether it be Dayton or, didn't matter which part. And I know Chair Lancheski would carry Palenti's bills and so forth as a courtesy. And I can see right now that members on this bill, or for me, I'm going to be getting the most calls with concerns about page 5, line 93. Oh, man, they'll activate those groups, and we'll be getting a lot of contact about that. But if you're on this side of the aisle, just say, I'm going to kill that, then you'll be fine. So with that being said, again, Commissioner, thank you. We've got a lot of work to do the next few weeks, and thank you, Chair Gomez, for hearing the bill.
All right, thank you, Chair Davids. Thank you so much, Commissioner, for joining us. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, just, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, thank you so much. And it's always great to be back in this committee. I know you've got a busy schedule and you're hearing the governor's bill today. I appreciate it. I look forward to working with you to the end to get something through. So again, thank you. So.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Commissioner, for joining us. There's no motion since we were hearing the bill just informationally.